Mourning the loss of a close loved one is a universal experience in our lives, and we try to accompany each other down that hard road whenever it is that we come to it. I have been extremely grateful for your kindness since my mother died nearly 2 years ago. This morning, I'd like to share with you one aspect of my loss that I believe has relevance to our Jewish lives together. And since it's Yom Kippur, I feel justified in asking your forgiveness for spending a little of your time sharing my own story and for talking so much about food when we're all fasting. My mother, Susan, was an incredible cook. Among her loved ones, she was famous for it. I used to watch her in the kitchen and marvel at her skill and intuition and at how much she loved what she was doing, all of which she inherited from her mother, who was also a fantastic cook and hostess. Before I took my first job, which was here at Temple 10 years ago, she gave me some of her classic recipes, handwritten on little note cards, each one including the necessary information as well as little notes explaining the more complex maneuvers. I used to call her from my apartment and frantically ask her with recipe in hand something like, "Is it a huge mistake if I used unsalted instead of salted butter?" And she would laugh and guide me through the rough patches, expounding on her own recipes with the wealth of her experience. After she died in 2010, I inherited all of her recipes, and they took on a new meaning for me. Even though I can't call her anymore, the recipes she used and the notes that she added bring me closer to her. When I use her texts and her advice to do something as mundane as preparing food, the act of cooking and the food it produces are elevated to a level of holy for me. The phenomenon of something ordinary becoming holy because it is connected with a loved one who has died or with a world that is no more is familiar to many of us, and I see it as a rabbi all the time. Couples may adorn their wedding chuppah with a grandfather's tallis. That tallis, because of what it represents, brings a level of sanctity to something that is otherwise just aesthetically beautiful. Our children's baby clothes, long since outgrown, that we just cannot bring ourselves to part with. A man going through his late father's writing desk, finding old letters, fountain pens, paperweights. These objects cease being just things and become holy artifacts. The parents who suffer the devastating loss of a child often cannot bring themselves to move anything in his room. A husband and wife who walk together in the park. When one of them dies, that walk becomes a pilgrimage for the other. And the advice that comes from someone we've loved and lost, even silly advice, becomes sacrosanct, and we mine our memories to find each nugget of wisdom they may have left behind for us. These acts and items and words remind us of the fragility of life and become keys that unlock a tiny door through which we can view a treasured past, and if we're lucky, a sliver of the world to come. But I am faced with a question as I perform my now sacred act of cooking with Mama's best recipes, and this question has been a painful one. Do I dare alter these recipes? When I put her meat marinade on mushrooms instead of steak, because we sometimes try to avoid red meat. When I add a Middle Eastern spice to her salmon recipe, spice that I know she hated, by the way, because I fell in love with the flavors of Israel when I was living there. When I use non-dairy butter in a chocolate pie because I'm attempting to observe a kosher law, am I betraying her? And if I choose to change a recipe, will this act of separation, of differentiation, of autonomy, shatter the sanctity I spoke of earlier? Will what felt so elevated come crashing down to earth if her text becomes suggestion rather than law? Am I following her example more by following her exact recipes, or am I following her example more by developing my own approach, thereby rejoicing in the act of cooking as she did? Which one brings me closer to her? Which one brings me closer to me? To put it in more general terms, what do we do if we are moved or forced to deviate from the value system of a loved one whom we would never dream of disappointing? You may be thinking, Rabbi Katie, you think too much while you're cooking. Turn on some music and pour yourself a glass of wine. It's a good suggestion, I hear you. You may also be wondering, Rabbi Katie, why are you talking about this on the Bima on Yom Kippur? I am so glad you asked. It occurred to me in the midst of this struggle that this is a tangible illustration of the challenges that face us as Reformed Jews, because Judaism has recipes too. They are also our ancestors' loving attempts to share themselves with us. And because of loss and change, they too have become sacred in the life of our people. What are our Jewish recipes? Well, of course, there's matzo ball soup and latkes, but we have recipes, as you know, that go beyond the kitchen. We have recipes that tell us how to eat, how to pray, how to treat our bodies, how to mark the passage of time and the seasons, how to rest, how to marry, how to bury, how to study, how to relate to one another, and how to respond to the injustices of our world. These recipes are written in the scroll that we just opened, and the notes about them, the tricks and the explanations, the nuances and the caveats are inscribed in many different places, from the Mishnah to the Talmud, to commentaries and midrashim, to the music and text of our service, and even on our own hearts, which is evident when we just know that a Jewish wedding takes place under a chuppah, or we place a rock on a Jewish headstone, or that Jewish babies often get named for a deceased relative. In the wake of each loss and catastrophic change in the Jewish people's life, we have been treating these recipes in much the same way that we as individuals treat the possessions of a loved one we've lost. For all these years, our people has been desperately trying to cling to and protect and preserve our Jewish recipes, because using them has made us feel for 100 generations more connected to the past, more secure in our lives, and closer to our Creator. Just like family recipes, these holy texts and inherited traditions of Judaism contain within them the voices of generations of our family, whether we were born into Judaism or we chose it. Those texts reflect their generous efforts to ease our way and lead us closer to truth and joy. They've given us recipes like, when you enter a new year, clean the slate and relieve your conscience by fasting, praying, forgiving those who've wronged you, and doing teshuvah yourself. Everyone deserves a fresh start. Gather together with other individuals when you pray and when you study. Don't do it alone, for when you gather, unified in purpose, the Spirit of God dwells among you. Or use a prayer book when you pray. Its words can become your home, a sturdy sukkah for your own spiritual searching. Take care of the most vulnerable among you, the poor, the stranger, the lonely, even the animals. How you treat them is a reflection of your own inner landscape. Cherish the land of Israel, where your very first ancestors found a path to God. Remember the tragedies of your past so you can honor it and learn from it. Or combine prayer, meals with loved ones, and intentional rest once a week, and you'll find you're able to fill your days with more joy and good works. These recipes, and they are only a few of the thousands that we have been given, are our ancestors' way of not leaving us alone to tinker in the kitchen. Instead, those loved ones for whom we were but a distant dream have meticulously recorded, preserved, and transmitted to us everything they know about how to live, in hopes that we wouldn't have to start entirely from scratch and seek wholeness and God without any sort of compass. Given their costly efforts and the sacrifices that they made, and given the mysteries and the challenges of life, careful and close listening to their voices is our sacred right, privilege, and responsibility. As our Torah portion this morning said, Atem nitzavim po kulchem. Each and every one of you is an heir to this teaching. Everyone owns it and is equally charged with protecting it. But we Reform Jews have trouble thinking of this inheritance in any of those ways. We often forget that these recipes are our inheritance too. We have a right to cherish them. We often overlook the wisdom that they contain. We are privileged to receive this much guidance from our past. And the hardest of all, we often resist the idea that anything is expected of us by our people or our God. We have a responsibility to see this inheritance safely to the next generation so they will have a spiritual and moral compass too. There are those Jews here in Memphis and around the world, alive today and long since departed, who argue that following the letter of the law is the only way to carry forward Jewish traditions and to connect us to our past and to God. The recipes, as they have been given, are sacred in their very form, and changing them to suit our modern sensibilities is an undoing of everything our ancestors tried to do for us and an act of astonishing hubris. Who are we, these Jews would say, to tamper with the sacred artifacts of the past? It would be akin to throwing out a family photo because you're not in it, ignoring the fact, of course, that the people who are in it are a part of you. Given this, it is not surprising that they react strongly, sometimes even violently, to those Jews who don't seem to cherish the inheritance as much as they do. And such impassioned reactions can make us believe that they see us clearly, that we don't deserve or even desire to access our tradition. We are asking different sorts of questions, and this can be disconcerting for everyone. But Reform Judaism was founded on the idea that adapting the recipes is also our sacred right, privilege, and responsibility. And in this, we respectfully but resolutely differ from our conservative and Orthodox brothers and sisters. Judaism, in its Reform state, argues that it is equally valid of an approach to thoughtfully put our own handprint on those traditions, to adapt them so that they are compatible with our lives, our priorities, our technologies, and our modern social consciences. We feel compelled, and we find it compelling, to seek the underlying purpose for observances and rituals, and evaluate them before we act. We hear Isaiah's words from this morning's Haftorah portion loud and clear. He asks, "Hachazeh yet som evcharehu? Is this the fast I desire? One that is all doing and no feeling and out of touch with the injustices of the world that you live in? No. You must be feeling what you're doing, and what you're doing must be fixing the world, or what you're doing and what you're feeling is meaningless." Evaluating our tradition with these kinds of questions in mind is not a gesture of abandonment or apathy, Reform Judaism insists, but rather it is an act of commitment and the capacity to improve the recipe. The movement that we are a part of, the philosophy that we ascribe to, asserts the old recipes are our basis because they are special, genius, timeless, and holy, just like the advice of someone we've loved and lost. But we believe that by owning, by adapting, by actually choosing our Jewish practice, as much as inheriting it, we are living up to our ancestors' example. Doing this, we say, will result in a Jewish life that is both communally connected and personally fulfilling. And the subtext of this full sanctuary is that perhaps we don't know it all the time, but we are all seeking such a connection and a Jewish life. Making decisions about what of our Jewish inheritance we should keep and what we should adapt and what we should even leave behind should be a difficult, emotional process, just like cleaning out a late parent's house after they've died. That process, as many here today know, involves a certain amount of holding on and a certain amount of letting go. It means going through every closet and drawer, putting a lot of things in boxes, bound for a new space, throwing a few things away, even though the sum of the parts, home, will be forever different. Reacting to change in our lives, individually and as a people, demands courage from us. Courage to know that we have the strength to carry with us what we love and leave behind what we must. One thing we are often accused of doing, and sometimes even guilty of doing, is throwing the old recipes out completely. This, please pardon the expression, is a recipe for disaster. There is so much at stake, and the principles of Judaism provide an indispensable foundation in today's fast-paced, materialistic, and uncertain world. We, each of us, must humbly acknowledge that there is wisdom and value in the recipes of Judaism. And the opportunity we forfeit as Reformed Jews when we don't even want to know what's in our family cookbook is staggering. But along with acknowledging our traditional recipes, wisdom, and value, we, each of us, must also acknowledge that we have something valuable and wise to bring to the table. And we must take time to figure out what that is. We must ask questions of ourselves, perhaps even today, like, what parts of my Judaism inspire me to go deeper, and how can I learn more? What Jewish experience sticks out as the most meaningful in my life, and how can I find that again? What scares me the most about the culture surrounding me, and what Jewish values can ground me? When it's my time to leave this world, what do I want my Jewish legacy to be? These are the steps we must take to ensure that a vibrant, substantive Judaism prevails in this world. It's on our shoulders. It's in our hands. It is up to us, and the time is now. The challenge before us is unique to Reformed Jews, and if we fail, our living tradition might as well be in a museum. So this year, I commit to exploring this theme with you at every possible opportunity, in classes, in services, in conversations. Together we will figure out how to save the old recipes and at the same time make them our own. Involvement in the life of this temple is an opportunity constantly to immerse in the recipes of Judaism. And we believe that taking advantage of this leads to a lifetime full of the most joyful and meaningful experiences imaginable and a reservoir of strength and healing when life's most difficult circumstances arise. I close with this final question. What is the most important ingredient in our arsenal to meet this challenge? It is faith. Faith in the end product. A willingness to believe that what lies on the other side of the work in the kitchen is an invaluable experience around a sacred table with food that is beautiful, healthy, and delicious. That is why we keep family recipes around anyway. They are the food of relationship and love and transcendence. And this brings me back to my mama. and maybe yours too. Yes, she was a great cook, but it's more than that. It's why she did it, why the best cooks in all our families do what they do. It's why Temple still stands. It's why investing in Judaism now pays back in dividends later. The recipes were her raw materials for building a lasting family. That is what I miss the most, but that's the legacy I honor. We all honor when we all try our own hands at it. We're fulfilling their legacy somehow, joining their search, even if we change a few things. As for me, when I do, I feel a little guilty, and I hear myself say, "I'm sorry, Mama." But I also think, "Look at me, Mama. I can cook." And I know she would be proud. I hope and pray that this Jewish family that we have built and are still building stays healthy and strong and eats well as the new year begins. Amen.